Hello and welcome. Today I have the pleasure of introducing you to Dave Fortune from the University of West England. He will be talking to us about the use of System3 Acrylics from Daler-Rowney for screen printing techniques. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the program. First, let's hear from Dave how he uses System3 Acrylics, mixing it with medium to make an exceptional screen printing ink.
Hi, my name's Dave Fortune. I'm over here from the UK to demonstrate and promote Daler-Rowney System3 Acrylics as a screen printing ink. The acrylics are sold in the UK and over here just as a paint, an acrylic paint, and for years that's all they were, an acrylic paint. But in '91 they came up with a screen printing medium which when mixed with the acrylic turns this into an ink, a usable, friendly screen printing, non-toxic ink. Great range of colours. System3 have got 60 colours. We seem to use gallons of it at the university. I work at the University of the West of England in Bristol, and I manage the screen printing studio there. We actually changed over to water-based in 1989-90 because the COSH regulations kicked in the UK, which meant that the Health and Safety Acts that were used in factories suddenly linked with universities. So everybody was panicking about non-toxic inks, and solvent-based inks were really out the window. So everybody had to throw them away and start to use the water-based systems. So I went to Berlin to research the process with Professor Neil Zumberhagen. The dean sent me over, and I went over there and spent a week with him to learn about the process. Then I came back, and we set up water-based screen printing at the University of the West of England. And from that point on, most other universities in the UK came to us to change over. We ran workshops and seminars for heads of department, printmakers, technicians, everybody. So over a period of 2 years, I would imagine that most of the universities in the UK had visited us at the University of the West of England. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to demonstrate the qualities of System3. It's a fantastic medium. The print medium is obviously non-toxic, non-smelly, very easy to use, friendly to use if you suffer from skin complaints, if you've got asthma or any sort of, it's allergic reaction to but no student has ever come to me and said, I'm having problems with this medium. It's fantastically inert in the way that it's nice to use, and no solvent smells at all because there are no solvents in it. The medium is in these small 1 litre containers, or we've got the 5 litre containers over here. Universities tend to use the 5 litre containers because we get through an awful lot of it. The colours also come in smaller tubes for home printmakers, but we'll talk about the sets later. We usually order big containers, 500 millilitres or even bigger with black and white. I think they do double that size. So mixing the inks, we'll go through the ink mixing first. We always start with the medium, System3 medium. And we tend to use little yogurt pots at the university. You can buy them straight-sided yogurt pots with very tight lids, so that with the students mixing their inks, they can put the lid on when they finish with a dab of colour on the top, which means that other students can use them. I mean, by the end of the semester, I have hundreds of these tubs. And if they don't get used, I usually give them to schools or home printmakers to use. So with mixing the ink, it's pretty straightforward, but you must always start with the medium. The screen printing medium, we're not going to need too much. And the percentage mix is very important. We mix 50-50, which is the strongest mix you can go to. Saying that, I have actually gone over the top a bit, maybe to 60%, but we need to add some liquid retarder, just a little drop of liquid retarder. It's an acrylic retarder. If you want a transparent colour, you can mix less of the acrylic, down to a very small percentage, in fact, and you don't get any streaking or spottiness with the transparent colours. So I'm going to mix a 50-50 mix here. I think I'll try and mix a sepia brown, so I'll start with a bit of vermilion and then some black. Now with the inks, there is a Mars black which I'm using today, but there is a process black which is the only colour that breaks the rule with a percentage mix. For some reason the process black is much stronger than the other colours, and if you're using process black you really only need about 30-35% pigment to the medium. Great black, and we have a set of process colours, so we've got cyan, magenta, process yellow and process black. So if you wanted to print separations, colour separations, full colour images, duotones, we've got the trichromatic set. So you mix the ink well, and I'll just add a little bit of yellow to that. Easy to mix. You've got to be sure that you mix it thoroughly, because if you tend to sort of miss a bit at the bottom on the first print, you get a sort of marbling effect. So be sure that you give it a really good mix. And what I usually do is then just try it by rubbing it down on a piece of paper. And you'll get to know, you'll actually get to feel when you're right. We do by volume first. We add the medium first, and then the same amount of pigment or mixture of pigments. And that's how we kick off with the students. But eventually, you can, by rubbing them down on a piece of paper, you can usually see what it's going to turn out like. And that's a good opaque 50-50 mix there. Again, on a really hot day, or if you're worried about severe detail, you can add a little bit of retarder, liquid retarder. But there's already retarder in this. There's an extender retarder within the System3 medium. The thing I've forgotten to tell you is there is also a textile medium, which we'll be demonstrating later, where we'll print some t-shirts. Same mix, and as easy to use. Okay, so I've got some watercolor paper under here. Watercolor papers, cartridge papers, they all work really well. Fantastic quality of image. The watercolor papers seem to give a really intense look to the inks, and most printmakers, if they were editioning, would use a watercolor smooth surface papers. The reason for the smooth surface is that we're using very fine screens. The screens we use are, in the UK it's 120T. Over here this would be 305, I think is the measurement. But we use slightly coarser ones if we're doing block color or big areas of ink. And then we use a coarser one again if we're printing on textiles or t-shirts. So the ink's mixed, I've got the paper underneath. I've set up some little plastic stops so that I can get the paper in position every time. I'll go through registration techniques a bit later on, because obviously if you're printing multiple colors, you need to be very accurate with your registration techniques. But this is just a single color image that I've drawn on a special hand drawing film, which is a textured film called Mark Resist, which I'll talk more about that when we go through the mark making. So this image is very fine, and we're going to print it now. I usually put a line of ink along the bottom. Some people start at the top, but usually the bottom. Put down plenty of ink. If you run out of ink halfway, sometimes it can cause problems, so I always put down plenty. So a line of ink at the bottom, and we're ready to print. We lift the screen, and with a good sharp squeegee, very important, the squeegee. I think people sometimes forget how important the squeegee is. It's a medium soft sharp Ulon blade. If you've got an old squeegee that's very hard, or if it's been chipped around, or if there's no give in it, you won't get a decent print. So you've really got to sort of sort out your squeegee. We're going to flood the screen. This is called a flood coat. We've got the ink there at the back. We're going to flood it across the image. And on the first print, I usually pull it twice. Then 45-degree angle on the squeegee. You press hard, you print, you lift the screen, and you flood. It's very important to flood the image every time. This charges the image ready for the next print, but it also stops the ink drying in. So there's the first print. All the detail, beautiful washes of colour will print up. And the beauty of this ink is the fact that you don't have to worry about drying in. Unless you're really silly. And if you leave it long enough, eventually it will dry in the mesh. Second print, it really does clear everything. It tends to be better, the second print. And then consecutive prints get better and better, really. Okay, 45 degrees. Print. Lift, back. So the beauty of this is the fact it doesn't dry in the screen. Tends to stay open even with extreme detail. I mean, these washes are still here. In fact, they're better than the last print. I'll pull another couple just to show you it's I mean, long runs are no problem with this. The great thing is you can have a rack full of these prints, and within probably 5 minutes they're dry. So they dry on the paper very quickly, which is very important. They also dry very quickly colour on colour, which is important. And no problems with having to rush too much. In fact, you know, you can leave it a decent length of time before you print. So we'll pull this one again. Okay, so on the last print, what I'm going to do is make sure you've flooded it. This is important that you flood it. So there's ink in the mesh, and that's stopping the any drying in within the actual print area. The worst thing you could do is leave it as if you printed it and it's a dry mesh. If you do that, then you might have troubles with staining. So I always say this is a wet process. You leave it flooded every time. And with when it's flooded like this, in fact, you can leave it like this for some time before you have any problems. So scrape up the ink. And then I usually spray them with a sort of spray unit with water, just cold water. But you can wash these up in situ. So you just need a soft sponge, a lighter sponge or something. Straight water, no soap, no solvents, no chemicals. The inks, when they're dry on the paper, which is very quick, they're probably dry now in fact, good archival quality, incredibly good light fastness, seem to be, I mean, I've got images on the wall that we put a big section of prints on the wall, direct sunlight, and they'd been there for years. And we've had no problems at all, even with the reds, which are notorious for actually fading in sunlight. Wipe it down. I usually just sponge the blade off the squeegee. The squeegee is not as important as the screen. You've got to tackle the screen first. The squeegee can wait because you've got quite thick ink on here, so it doesn't dry, you know, very quickly on the squeegee. So I'll just give that one final wash. So this screen's ready now to print another colour or to store away for the next time you need it, or to wash off and put another stencil on. So very easy to use, quick, clean, no solvent smells. There's just absolutely nothing really that, I mean, I've used this ink system at my son's junior school with them, and it's fine. It's a beautiful, easy system. And as I say, layers up. I've printed images that are maybe, I think I've done 15, 20 color images. You'll see a few samples here at the back, but you'll see some more later in the film. So what we'll do next is we'll run through to the mark making. I just want to talk a little bit more about these mediums and the pigments. The mediums, as I said before, are 1 litre size or the 5 litre size. We tend to use the 5 litre size more in universities because we get through gallons of the stuff. And with the medium, these bottles store really easily, and in fact on 1 or 2 occasions I've dropped one down the steps at my studio, and they're very robust. So these are a great design. The small 1 litre ones I would have thought were more for print cooperatives and home printmakers, but you know, they may well use these big ones as well. Mix of these pigments, as I said before, is all important. You've got to get this mix right. If you go over the 50-50 mark, you will probably have problems. If you go sort of 60-70%, you probably start having problems, which you could overcome with this acrylic retarder. The fabric medium, textile medium, is the only difference with this is after you've printed your image on your t-shirt or your piece of fabric, when it's dry, you iron the back to cure it. But this is as easy to print as the paper and board medium, and has the same qualities of not drying into the mesh, which is a great quality. So what I'm going to do next, I must tell you about the kits. There are some small kits for starter kits in System 3, small sizes. They get slightly bigger. So if you wanted to sort of test them out, the best bet would be buy one of these kits and a small container and do some experiments yourself. But these are fabulous for schools, home printmakers, just to kick off with before you start buying these. We buy these because we get through a lot, and with the primary colors we can buy the bigger ones. There's 2 sizes here. We get through an awful lot of white. I think we probably get through 3 times as much white as most of the other colors. So great for the bigger users. You know, we as I say, we probably have 3 or 4 orders of these inks sent in, 1 each semester, and we do use a lot. So what we'll do is we store these. For the students, we have a cabinet where we put these out, the containers out to use. Huge range. As I say, there's 60 colors. You might not need the whole 60 colors. I always find that if you've got a set of primary colors, you can mix most colors from primaries, but to tweak the colors, you need some of the other colors to. I don't think we've not actually got 60 colors at the university, but over the years I've used most of them and tested them out. The white's good opaque white. It's going to probably in the future, there's a set of tinters being made, neat tinters, which we'll talk about later on as well, for serious printmaking. If you need to boost the pigmentation, especially for an overcolor white that you need to cover black with maybe, but we'll talk about that later on.
Now that we've seen how System3 Acrylics can be used on paper, let's look at it with a different medium on textiles, like printing a t-shirt, for instance.
Hi, back again with some information about textile printing with System 3. Just as easy as paper and board printing, same mix of inks, 50-50 mix. Starting with the acrylic again, same acrylics, we're going to mix them with a textile medium instead of the paper and board medium. Okay, the textile medium comes in 2 sizes. This one is sort of handy for home printmakers. Universities, bigger print studios, cooperatives use the bigger containers. It's interesting because with this mix of acrylic and print medium for textiles, you'd think you'd have more drying in problems, but in fact I would say it's probably easier to print than the other one. So we're going to mix some ink first, and we're going to start with the medium. We always start with the medium, with the paper medium and with the textile medium. This seems to give you a more even mix than starting with the actual pigment. Also, the pigment can start to dry a little bit and you might just get a little grainy mix, so always start with the medium, be it for paper and board or textile. Start with the medium and a 50-50 mix again. And we'll mix up another colour. We'll try some sort of blue. So add the pigment, and again be really sure that you stir this in without leaving bits of medium unmixed. What we're going to do is print this image onto a cotton t-shirt. It's a very fine image, photographic image, and we'll talk more about these ways of putting these images onto screens, techniques of making marks on film. We'll talk about that later on. I'm going to add a little bit of white to this, because just a drop. Okay, another way of getting it out of the containers. At the universities, these tend to get a bit blocked after a while, so we just take the tops off and use them like this. Either way works well. A bit of white. This again keeps really well, like the paper and board medium and mix. If you put a lid on this, some sort of lid, they keep for months. We've actually got inks that are a year old. After about sort of a year, they tend to start to want to get a little bit thicker, but I just go around with some liquid retarder and just put a little bit of liquid retarder on the top and mix it in, and that keeps them for another while. You know, they do last a long time, these inks. Okay, so that looks really good. And we'll start printing. Medium along the bottom again. Okay, we've spread the mixed ink along the back of the screen. This is a coarser mesh. You need a coarser mesh for printing on fabrics. It needs to put more ink down. The paper and board mesh is too fine for this. So this is a 140 or a 158 mesh count, which will work. Either of those will work well on this t-shirt material. Same technique. We spread the ink across the image. On the first print, I usually do it twice, and then even pressure and print the image. Flood it back. Very important to flood it back again. You need to coat the screen to keep it open. Okay, but the quality of these images are fabulous. The detail, every little line prints up. And you're not rushing again. There's no need to rush with this. You can print hundreds of these t-shirts. I actually, the first time I tested this ink, I asked a friend if I could print some t-shirts for him, and the next day he delivered 600 t-shirts. It was a project that he'd set up. So I printed them. I did them all in a day, 600 t-shirts, 2 color. And but then my wife had to iron them, and I think it took her a long weekend with her mother and family. 3 minutes, 2 minutes, I did the hot iron on the back, but I'll tell you more about that after we've printed. Okay, so we're going to print second image again. Print, flood. And if you want to pull it twice, that's fine. If you flood it twice, you'll give yourself even longer to print. But these inks do not dry quickly. But they dry quickly on the garment. Long runs are no problem. You could print hundreds if you wanted. Under there. And this is just on a little hand-built screen bed, so you don't need complex equipment to do this. You can build your own little screen beds, or you can buy them from different places. Okay. Same again. Right. So say this is the last print, I would flood it twice. Take the t-shirt out. Again, the image is as crisp as it was on the first pull. Absolutely no problem. Now all you'd have to do with this, when it's dry, which is probably in 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, leave it for a little while, turn it inside out, and you iron the inside of the image. On the other side of the t-shirt, turn it inside out and iron it. Usually 2 or 3 minutes with a hot iron, and that will cure it, which means at a 40-degree wash, they stay sound, they won't wash out, they won't fade. I think initially on the first wash it might fade fractionally, but hardly anything, okay? And when we wash this up, it's the same technique of get rid of most of the ink back into the pot because somebody else could use it, another student might want to use it, or you might want to do another run of t-shirts. Scrape up the ink carefully. Just sponge it over with the cold water again. This ink doesn't affect your hands at all. I think the water affects your hands. I tend to get dry hands because my hands are in water all the time at the university. And these are fantastic inks to use for textiles. As you can also see, they don't stain the stencil. So it's very quick. There's no trouble, no problems with it. Just make sure the mesh looks pretty clear here. Sponge the squeegee blade. Okay, you can use the same squeegee for this, for t-shirts. Fabric squeegees usually have a different profile. They have a round profile instead of a square edge. But these work really well. They're just the same. You'll actually get more detail with one of these. But I changed the angle of print. Instead of printing at 45 degrees, I usually go over fractionally more, and it puts more ink through. So there you go. Fabric printing as easy as paper and board printing. There's no problems with that at all.
Now, here is an exciting way and unique way to use System3 Acrylics for ceramic transfers or enamels.
Hi again. We've got another very interesting area to talk about. And we're going to talk about water-based ceramic transfer printing or ceramic decal printing. Ceramic decals are an image that's printed on a clear base, which is then set on a piece of gum paper. So when you print on the clear base and it's dry, you can cut out sections, put the back of the gummed paper into water, leave it for a minute, and then it slides off onto your ceramic piece or your tile or your enamel, because it will print on metals, enameled metals. And I've got some samples here of images that I take with me on these excursions to the visits. These are all little samples, and they're printed on steel. So it's enamel on steel. Basically, we're printing a glass powder mixed with a medium onto the steel. It dries, and then we fire it. These are fired in small enamel kilns, but if you were sliding onto a piece of ceramics or a ceramic plate or a tile, you would have to use a big kiln for this. So I'm going to try and explain the process to you now. We would set the stencils up, make your images hand-rendered or film images from a computer onto film. You could use laser prints or you could use image set. You put your stencil on the screen and you do everything the same as we would for paper or for textile printing. So you've got your screen with your stencil on and you're ready to print. Now the mix of ink is different. You obviously can't fire these. But there is a component or components that there are System3. This is one of them. It's the glazed medium gloss. And we use the liquid acrylic retarder as well with it. And with the mix, most people only want to mix small amounts. You can mix large amounts, but a small amount, we usually cover enough to print 6 small US size images, US letter size images. So we're going to mix up, we've got a very simple recipe for this, and the recipe is 1 heaped teaspoonful of the glazed medium gloss and 1 flat teaspoonful of the Daler-Rowney acrylic medium. Now you mix them together, and it's only a minuscule amount in the bottom of the cup. But the other component you need is something called on-glaze powder. You can get on-glaze powders and underglaze powders. And the on-glaze powder, you'll probably have to go to a ceramic supplier and check it out where to buy it. It's not that costly, comes in powder form. It's a bit dodgy, you've got to be a bit careful using it when it's in the powder form. But as soon as you mix it with the medium, it's fine. When it's wet, it's fine. Obviously, you mustn't eat sandwiches or put your hands in your mouth. You wouldn't do that anyway, you know. So the mixture of powder then, you've still got your teaspoon. You're going to add 3 heaped spoonfuls of the on-glaze powder, whichever colour you want. And basically, on-glaze powder is ground glass. Very fine grind. So you mix your 3 heaped spoonfuls. You might have to vary it a little bit. You might have to add another little bit of this. But it's got to end up the same viscosity as when you have the inks. It's a bit like double cream, that sort of viscosity. So you mix it in, mix it really well. When you mix the powder in, it feels lumpy, and then you'll keep mixing, and it smooths out into quite a nice sort of printable viscosity. So you've got your amount there. It's not very much. It's only about there. And that's enough to print about half a dozen sheets of US writing paper size, maybe at 50% or 75% coverage. So you've got to work quite quickly. You've got to have your stencil ready. You've got to be ready to print. You mix this last, very last thing you do. And the reason for that is it doesn't last long. It'll tend to dry in. It'll dry up. Because it's varnish, it doesn't last that long. If you mix the whole tub of it, it would last for ages. But because we're mixing a very small amount, this is the final thing you do. So you've got your screen ready to print. Now the material that we print on is something called transfer paper. And the transfer paper is usually an A3 size. You can get it in A2 sizes. And it's a backing paper with a gum in between, and then a special surface printed on the top, a special varnish. And this is exactly what you print onto. So you would line this up under the screen as per usual. You'd put your ink down on the screen and print as I've shown you to print before. But you've got to work a bit quicker. In fact, you've got to work quite a lot quicker because it does tend to want to dry in. So everything's set up. You've got your paper underneath. You mix your ink, which is the mixture of glazed medium gloss and the retarder with the on-glaze powder, and you print. You flood and print as per usual, and there should be no problems, but you've got to be fast. And the first thing to do is, once you've finished, don't worry about the squeegee, but flood the screen, put the squeegee out the way, take the screen straight to a washout tank and spray it with water. And what you might find is that you get a slight stain around the edges of the screen. You might find that you get a slight stain around the outside of the emulsion. But not to worry about that. As long as the image area in the center, the printed bit, is okay, you'll be fine. Okay, so when they're printed, again, they dry incredibly quickly. And I've got some here that I've done for other people and some of mine. This is an image on enamel. That's fired, so that is more or less, it's ground glass which sinks into the enamel, and it's a fired enamel image. But there's the original, and that was printed in grey instead of black. But that was the original, and what I would have done is I had the piece of pre-coated enamel plate. It's a steel, but it's been enameled white and fired. I found a big tray for water, a shallow tray. You drop this into the tray of water. It'll tend to want to curl up a little bit, but when it flattens out, it's usually ready to slide. So wet the piece with water, wet your surface, and then by holding on the edge, you slide this onto the enamel. And then with tissue, or with baking roll paper, blot it from the middle outwards. So you're pushing all the water to the edges. And then you'll find as it dries, it tightens up. It'll tighten up, and it'll, by the time it's dry, it's a matte image. It just looks like this, but stuck on here. The gum is actually sticking it to the enamel. After that, we fire them in an enamel kiln, or if you're doing a piece of ceramics, if you slid them onto a mug or a plate or a tile, you put them in a ceramics kiln. And all the times, firing times, are going to vary, because with this, it's a quicker firing time. They're in small enamel kilns, but this is in, we usually go up to about 800 degrees for ceramics. But all of these, all this information about firing times and mixtures are in the book, my book, which I haven't mentioned yet, but I will now. And this is the Art Teacher's Guide to Water-Based Screen Printing. Very comprehensive book. It goes through absolutely everything you could need to know about the process, also about the ceramic transfer process. There's actually at the back, there's even a problem-solving section. Fantastic. I mean, there's everything you could want to know in there. And most colleges, universities have a copy of this in the library. And if they're in studios, they get very dog-eared, these, because they're used all the time. They're fantastic. So that's well worth having. And that, I think, I'm probably in the future will probably revise it again, but at the moment that's completely up to date. There's a few more transfers I've printed here, which I haven't slid yet, but I will give a demo later on of sliding a transfer. We'll find a white tile and I'll just show you how we slide them onto the tile. This was printed in a turquoise. These colours, you get many colours in the on-glaze powders, but as I say, you probably have to go to a ceramic supplier in your area. Okay, thank you.
System3 acrylics and mediums also come in a complete set, for beginners or just to discover the great versatility of these inks. Now let's take a look at this set together.
Okay, this will be interesting for people who would like an introduction to screen printing. Daler-Rowney have come up with a kit, screen printing kit, which is just brilliant to experiment with if you're a beginner. Fantastic in the way that it's got a decent squeegee, a decent screen. We've got acrylic colours, a good set of primary colours. We've got the squeegee, which is a really good squeegee, in fact. Base for medium for textile, and medium for paper and board. So everything you need here, really, for experimenting with. If you want to experiment on a t-shirt, that's fine, or on paper, we've got the paper medium as well. Same mixes as I've explained before, 50-50 mix. These are the same System3 inks. So you've got a good range to with these colours, you can mix most colours, in fact, primary colours. As I say, the squeegee is good quality. It prints really well. Medium soft rubber, nice and sharp, and the screen, which is a good quality mesh, and it's a 90T, so you'll get some good detail with it. I do suggest, though, maybe if you're going to use it lots, I would give the wood a coat of varnish. Just give it a coat of varnish, because it's going to be in and out of water quite a lot, but it's not essential. With your design drawn on the screen, and it's dry with the drawing fluid, you then, usually I place a couple of blocks of wood or something under there to keep the screen off the table, because you're going to spread this wax over the screen now and over your image. So some people use a credit card. I've used a credit card, but other people actually use the squeegee. So you've got it just above the table. You've got a line of wax, but plenty down, plenty of this block down there. Catch it with the edge of the squeegee or with your credit card. With the credit card, you'd be doing it in smaller sections. But if you're going to do it with the squeegee, in one go, you need to pull all of the screen block at the same angle as you print over your image, right to the end. Then you scrape up any bits that are left on the screen, because you'll be left with quite a lot, and place it somewhere to dry. I must warn you that if you squeegee it more than once and you push through 2 layers through, it's going to start hanging out the back of the screen and you might have problems. Best thing is to turn it over and then squeegee it that side as well until it's a nice thin coating, okay? So now, yeah, put the screen somewhere. You can dry it on end, you can dry it flat somewhere, but don't sit it flat on a table or it's going to weld to the table probably. Now when this is dry, this is a very funny brown colour when you put it on, and when it's dry it goes a much lighter brown, so you'll know when it's dry. You then hose with a spray in your bathroom spray with cold water. It's got to be a spray rather than a jet. Spray it, spray it, spray it, and you'll find that your lines that you've drawn will wash away, leaving just the filler. So your image is then going to be in negative. Brown with the image that you drew will be left out in clear mesh, which means that when you print, the ink goes through the clear mesh and gives you a positive image again. Okay. So when it's dry, I usually find some tape. You can use sellotape, you can use brown water tape, just to cover the blank areas of mesh around the edges. You can use certain sorts of parcel tape as well. But if you use parcel tape, if you use just an ordinary parcel tape, don't leave it on too long because it tends to release the gum and it leaves gum on the screen, which is a problem. So once you've taped it out, it's ready to print. And you print exactly the same way as I've shown you previously. You put your paper underneath. I find it's sometimes handy to have maybe your brother or someone to hold the screen while you print. So they're holding the screen, you've got your t-shirt underneath, even pressure, and print and flood as usual. So it's a really interesting and fun way to start screen printing. It's a basic kit, but the components are really good. The ink's good. It's all the same as the ink that I use for editioning, but as a starter kit, if you practice and use it regularly and maybe try some fabric printing t-shirts as well as paper, it's a good way to kick off and start your screen printing adventure.
System3 Acrylics are being used by students and artists at home, but also in schools and universities. Let's take a quick look at the different equipment and environment in a more professional setting.
Okay, I thought I'd just have a quick talk about originals for photographic screens, for coated screens, and the way of producing a film positive. The first way which we introduce students to in their first year is by giving them a piece of textured film to draw on. And with this textured film, you can use many ways of methods of making marks. We use Chinograph pencils, soft graphite, soft pencils, good quality black inks. We use sort of liquid fuel, lighter fuel sometimes, just to get these lovely little marks, these added washes. Dip pens, anything that's black and will hold back the light. So you do your drawing on this film, and anything you've drawn in black or any grains or textures that are in black will print. The other way is photocopies on acetate, which you can actually sandwich with something you've drawn. So you could actually, once you've drawn your image, you could put a photocopy on top and expose both of them together. So that's an interesting technique, especially if you're an illustrator, or you can sort of hand render and you're interested in mark making. That's a really good way to go forward. Another technique, which is for the finer detail, is either from a laser printer, a wide format or inkjet printer, but the finest detail can be achieved on an image setter, which is the costliest technique of producing a film positive. But with an image setter, you get a beautiful, beautiful quality halftone or dot or line, fantastic quality. So you've got a whole range of techniques of producing a film positive, be it by hand, photocopy, inkjet, or image set. You're just producing positive on film, so that the light will go through and expose your coated screen.
Thank you for watching this program. We hope you enjoyed it, and good luck with all your projects using System3 Acrylics by Daler-Rowney. Thank you.